Hello, friends. Does it feel like a coon's age since we have had shared this podcast moment together? It has been forever. So I'll just remind you, yes, here's my face, ta-da! But you are welcome to just listen to me. Do not have to watch. So it's fine to just toss this on while you're driving in your car and listen. I want to talk about Dug Down Deep. As I'm interacting with people from last year and interacting people with from this year, I remember how this book goes. So I want to point out a couple of things because most of us will have one of two responses to this book, and actually neither of them are what we would really want. So let's dig into Dug Down Deep for a second. I'd like to start by quoting him on page 30. Pursuing orthodoxy and sound doctrine has to begin with a heart drawing close to Jesus, not a theological system, denomination, or a book. How I interpret that sentence is that while this book is attempting to clarify for us what we believe about God, it actually is supposed to be a pursuit to getting to know God and an engagement between us and God, as opposed to setting up a theological system or affirming our doctrine. Because the truth is, well, for just a moment, let me quote one more thing. On page 44, he says, he gives the story about, in order for God to see me down through time, he would have had to have orchestrated a billion things. He would have had to break my grandpa's leg or have that happen so that my grandpa goes to the hospital and meets my grandma and all that kind of stuff. So he's talking about how God is infinitely different than us, and that's marvelous. But then he says, God's attributes are not merely a list of facts and features. They are truths that inform beliefs and inspire faith. God reveals truth about himself in his word, not for the sake of knowledge, but for the sake of relationship. The reason why I'm pointing out these two quotes is that most of us will have one of two responses to this book. The first one that I think is more common to new lifers than the second one, but the first one is to say this is kind of dry. That I don't like studying the words doctrine or theology or orthodoxy. Is just not lighting up my fire. This is kind of dry. For most of us that feel that way about this book, we have really resonated with the story type feel of the previous book, Good and Beautiful God. And the idea of digging in and studying theology or studying doctrine, it does not sound exciting to us. And the reason that is because we want to feel like we are drawing near to God. We want to engage with God. And that is a noble and beautiful gesture. But it's not actually the safe answer. Ultimately, the reason why I don't want that for us is not so that we will think that this book is awesome. That's not the point. I don't need to defend this book in any way, shape, or form. But we're actually misunderstanding something about how God works, because we can engage with God through story and we can feel that that is a friendship and it's so fun. But then when we go to engage our minds in deeper thinking, really what we're saying is I don't know how to engage my mind and my spirit with God. And that is something that we want to shore up. So let me switch for a second and talk to the other part of us, because there will be a certain set of us that go to read this book and we will think something along the lines of, finally we can get down and talk about like logical and black and white things, and finally we can have these deep discussions. And the truth is, you might think that's the right response because we need to be well educated in our faith. But the truth is that also he is speaking directly to that when he talks about these God's attributes, not merely a list of facts. They are truths that inform beliefs and inspire faith. And that's why we're thinking finally. But God reveals truths about himself in his word, not for the sake of knowledge, but for the sake of relationship. And so here's why I want to caution you about the two most common responses to this book. Either to think that it is dry and we just need to do this as a drudgery to build our faith, or to think finally we can start talking about the mind. There's nothing wrong with the enthusiasm, and there's nothing wrong with saying this book doesn't speak to my spirit as well. But here's the thing. The purpose for either side, every single one of us engaging with this book, the purpose is supposed to be to engage with God. And we might find it easier to engage with God in certain ways other than other ways. But when we started out this year in orientation, I don't know if you recall, but it was Monica who was the one who actually said this to us in our orientation. But our theme verse is, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And if we leave out any one of those things, we will have a lopsided faith that will not stand the test of time. would be a house built on sand, in the words of Doug Down Deep. What Shay was saying to us was, this year we're going to actually press into all 4 of those, because for that first group of people that feels like a book like this is dry, we probably connect God significantly better through our spirit and through our heart than we do when it comes to our minds. And we actually need to shore that up. This is exactly the book. While it may not be the book that you emotionally connect with, this is actually exactly the book that you need, because you will naturally feed into the areas of your faith that you connect with. But we need to go past just what we naturally are drawn to and feed into the area of us that we would not naturally be drawn to. But it is a misunderstanding to think that we could get into a book and simply read it through obligation and get out of it what God wants for us. If we are not engaging with God on it, then we will only get head knowledge going in at a certain level. Ultimately, I'm not going to be able to cure the book's dryness because it is an intellectual pursuit, this book. What I will say is, so this is my kind of person that struggles this way. What I am saying is that when I find myself turning page after page after page and thinking, this is interesting, that, yeah, okay, there we go, thank you, that's what I got, but I don't find myself pausing to talk to God about what I'm reading, that's why I feel like the book is droll. That's why I feel like it's dry, because I'm not engaging with God on it. Well, the problem there is not the book. Other books make it easy for me to engage with God. The problem is not the book. The problem is I don't know how to use this side of my faith to engage with God. I either can think over here or I can feel God over here, and I don't know how to put them together. But that's not the way my faith is the strongest. In order to get what God is offering, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, I need to find a way to engage my mind and my heart with God at the same time. So for those of us who feel like this book is dry, my challenge to you is to check your spiritual temperature as you're going through. If you don't find yourself stopping to ponder with God, or stopping to ask, or stopping to rebel, even if you find yourself with rebellion building, if you're not stopping to talk to God about things that you're reading in here, either things that you agree with, things that you disagree with, things that tick you off, if you're not actually talking to God about it, then you're not actually getting out of this time what you want. That's why obligation won't work, and just reading the book to read the book and hoping that the discussions with your legacy group will light you up. What lights you up is engaging with God, not a particular book. And some books usher us into the presence of God easier because of how we're wired. But the point is the presence of God as opposed to the book itself. For the second group of people who think, finally, you are in danger as well. Not because your response is wrong. I don't mean to say either of these is wrong. There's just a space for Satan in both of them. For us, for that kind of person, what we're dying for is to engage in stimulating conversation and have some things that are firm that we can count on. But it's very tempting for this kind of person to accidentally confuse convictions and beliefs and systems and conclusions with spending time with God. Because the truth is, I could pick up the newspaper and encounter God, and that's where I should be enjoying the process. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. I could be cleaning toilets and engaging with God. We are choosing to read this book and engage with God. But if you click with this book and you're loving the black and white nature of it, it would be very easy to accidentally confuse clicking with this book with engaging with God. So in the end, this one is a little bit trickier. For the person that thinks this book is dry, if we're not stopping to engage with God, we can clearly see, okay, I've got God out of this situation. But if God has wired your brain up to think intellectually and this book naturally speaks to you, it would be also tempting to believe that you have engaged with God purely because your mind is stimulated. Going back to what Monica said about loving God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, if you are naturally drawn to loving God with your mind, then you can feel like you are spending time in God's presence because you're engaging your mind, because that's how God made you to be. But do not be fooled. It is totally possible for you to engage your mind and leave God right out of the picture. That's what the Pharisees looked like. They had their minds fully engaged, but their hearts were far away from God. I'm not calling you a Pharisee. I'm just saying it's totally possible to engage your mind and leave God out of it as well. So for you, I would ask the question, actually for all of us, I would ask the question, how would you know? And I want you to, actually, it's not a rhetorical question, and I'm not going to answer it for you. How would you know if you were reading this book and adding to your head knowledge, or how would you know if you were engaging with God? Because each of us actually has a different answer to that question. So I'm not going to answer it. I know how to answer it for myself. But you'll need to press in. How would I know if I was reading this book and actually engaging with God? One of the ways the Bible answers that question is the fruit of the Spirit. I would expect to see love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control whenever I'm engaging with God. But for me, I can get kind of, when I'm caught up in the moment and I'm feeling excited about something, I can easily think that that's me engaging with God. So you're going to need to press into, how would you know whether you think this book is droll or whether you think this book is like, finally we get to talk about some stimulating stuff? How would you know if you were engaging with God in that topic? And that's my challenge for you as we end this. The truth is, these last two books, while being extremely different in their tenor, the tenor of the books is very different. They are extremely similar. The first book, and the reason why we read it first, was in order to talk about who God is, that God is loving and God is holy and God is the one that transforms us. And we got to know who God is. And the beginning of Dug Down Deep is talking about who God is, but the vast majority of Dug Down Deep is going to hit the same ideas. What do you believe about God? But it's going to spend a lot more time, instead of talking about the person of God, it's going to spend a lot more time talking about God's actions. And not only God's actions, but what God's actions mean for you, for me. And for those of us that are all feelings-based and experience-based, the story feeling of that first book really resonated with us because it felt so personal. It was talking about the person of God. And then therefore we might struggle with this book, who is talking about God's actions and what it means for us. We might have trouble applying that or resonating with that. But both are pointed to exactly the same thing. What we believe about God has major ramifications in our day-to-day lives. And I'm going to do a podcast a little bit later on that same concept of how that plays out. What we believe about God ultimately defines our day-to-day lives and our satisfaction in our day-to-day lives. But to put your heart at ease, whether you liked the first book or liked the second book or vice versa, they are actually two different angles on the same exact thing. What do you believe about God? And therefore, how does that have ramifications in your day-to-day life? So I say, enjoy the process. It's possible this book will be a total soul training exercise for you. But if you're encountering God, even if it's good hard work, it will be good hard work. So I say, enjoy.